Whether you're building a new home or adding on, framing up the situation, or putting a roof over your head, if you need to rock it, roll it, or just get on with it, HomeTime has a video to help you do it right. Transform your small bathroom into a luxurious master bath, or increase your home's value by updating your old kitchen. Keep your drains draining, your switches switching, and your footing firm. Whether you do it yourself or buy it yourself, HomeTime's how-to video guides will help you get the results you want. Will make your next project a success. See your local home improvement retailer for the HomeTime video that's right for you.
Hi, I'm Dean Johnson. In this video, we've taken some of the projects that we've worked on at HomeTime over the past 7 years and organized them into sort of a video encyclopedia. They're divided into 5 categories: plumbing, electrical, windows and doors, ceilings and walls, and floors. And I'll be working with Robin Hartle and Joanne Liebler. HomeTime is made possible by Chevy Truck, who brings you Chevy full-size pickups, today's big pickups for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Chevy S-Series pickups, today's compact pickups that play as hard as they work. Chevy's Astro all-wheel drive, today's mid-size van with standard 4-wheel anti-lock brakes. Chevy trucks, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road. The National HomeTime PBS series is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley's been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right.
Somehow, some way, this receptacle has gotten loose. So now whenever you plug something into it, it kind of flickers on and off. It's time to replace it. As always, before we do any electrical project, we turn off the circuit breaker that controls this outlet. To test that the power is off, I stick the probes of the circuit tester in both slots of the outlet. No light. And I check both the top and the bottom receptacles. Now I take off the cover plate. This is held in place with a small screw. Now, just to be safe, I'm going to test the circuit again and make sure it's off. This time, I touch the probe to the screw terminals on both sides where the wires are attached. I start with the top set of screws and then test the bottom set. Now I just unscrew the wires from the outlet. Make a note of the arrangement of the wires. When we replace the receptacle, we'll want to hook up the wires the same way. The colors of the wires and the terminals are standardized, so that makes it easier. From here, it's an easy matter to screw the wires onto the terminals of the new receptacle. I always wrap the wire around the terminal so it hooks in a clockwise direction. When I tighten the screw, it'll tend to pull the wire into the terminal, making a better connection. If the color of the terminals is unclear, there is another system for telling the screws apart. The ground terminal is usually specially marked with a GR. The white wire goes to the side with the longer slot on the face, and the black wire matches up with the side with the shorter slot.
Now, we think the power's off, but we can't be sure until we get inside and test. To test for power, I touch the circuit tester between the 2 terminals and between each terminal and the copper ground wire. If the light doesn't light up in any position, then it's safe to work on the switch. We proceed much like we do in replacing a receptacle. I note the position of the wires and remove the switch. There are 2 black wires for this switch. You may also find 1 black and 1 white wire. I install the switch by connecting up the wires just like they were on the old switch. 1 black wire to 1 terminal and the other black wire to the second terminal. It shouldn't really matter which black wire goes to which terminal. Some switches will also have a ground system, but that's unusual. When I put the switch back in the wall, it's important that it go back in right side up. Standard practice is to install the switch so flipping it up turns the light on. Now, this is extremely important because this is a silent mercury switch. It won't operate unless installed properly. And of course, not all switches are going to look like this one.
If you've got a light or outlet that's run by 2 or more separate switches, you'll find it's a little different to wire. These are called 3-way and 4-way switches, and they all operate the same light. The switches are unique, and so is the wiring between them. You can see that there are 3 wires in 2 of the boxes, and 4 in the center one. The number of terminals determines what type of switch it is. Switches with 3 wires connecting to 3 terminals are called 3-way switches. 4 wires and 4 terminals means a 4-way switch. If any of these fail, you must replace them with the same type of switch. On a 3-way switch, there's one special terminal. On this switch, it's marked with a black screw and the word common on the box. It will always be connected to a black wire. It's critical that when you replace the switch, this common wire gets reattached to the common terminal on the new switch. The other 2 wires can be reversed and the switch will still work. A 4-way switch will have 2 pairs of wires. Make sure that you reattach 1 pair on the top and 1 on the bottom. Don't split the leads of 1 pair between a top and bottom terminal.
The first step on this lamp is to do a little troubleshooting to see if we can repair it before we have to replace anything. The contact here in the bottom of the socket is a problem sometimes. So first I try scraping it off with the tip of a screwdriver and then prying it up a little. If these steps don't work, I'll start to take apart the socket. Most sockets have a press marking on the upper cover. I squeeze the cover here and work it off. Then I remove the insulating cardboard sleeve. Sometimes a lamp will fail because the wires have come loose from the terminals, so you should check to make sure they're solid. If the connections look good, the next thing to troubleshoot is the cord. Remove the wires from the screw terminals. Note how they're connected. If there's a silver lead and a copper lead, the copper goes to the brass screw. If both leads are copper, as they are here, then the lead with the ridge on the side of the insulation goes to the silver screw. Now I use a continuity tester to check the cord. There should be no continuity between the ends of the 2 wires or between the 2 prongs of the plug. If there is, then there's a short circuit somewhere in the wire or plug and they should be replaced. There should be continuity between 1 wire and 1 prong, and between the other wire and the other prong. If there isn't, then again, the wire and plug should be replaced. If there's a switch on the lamp or cord, you'll need this in the on position to test the continuity. Now, if none of these quick fixes work, then you'll have to replace the socket. I'm going to add something called an underwriter's knot. This protects the leads from being yanked off of the terminals. Be sure to get a replacement that matches the original. You probably only need to get the inner socket. The wires just connect up to the new socket. As always, I put a hook in the wire and wrap it around the screw terminal. Notice that this wire has many small strands of copper inside. This makes it flexible in a way that single-strand wire isn't. But these bare wires should be twisted tight before I attach them to the screw terminals. Now, the plug at the end of a lamp cord or any other appliance can also be easily damaged and also easily repaired. For simple flat cords like this, you can use a quick connect plug. The plug pulls apart by squeezing the prongs together. Then I feed the end of the plug through the back of the cover. Spread the prongs apart, insert the wire into the back of the core, and squeeze the prongs together. I slide the cover down onto the core and the job is complete. These plugs are fine for lights and small appliances, but if you want a little stronger connection, it's easy to find plugs with screw terminals. For these, you start with a clean end on the wire. This type of wire is sometimes called zip cord because the 2 sides pull apart easily to allow you to strip them. For this plug, I strip about 3/4 of an inch off the ends of the 2 wires and twist the strands of the leads together tightly. Each lead also gets a hook at the end to fit around the screw terminals. When I connect the leads to the terminals, I attach the lead with the ridge on the side to the silver neutral terminal. If the screws aren't color-coded, this lead goes to the wider prong. The final step is to work the cover back down over the core. Now things are a little different if you're working with a grounded plug. Cords with grounded plugs will usually have the ground molded right at the end of the cord, but these can start to fray and work loose over time. The best thing to do is just to replace the plug. First I cut off the old plug and strip the ends of the wire. This cord has an outer sheathing of insulation. I strip back about 1.5 inches of this with a utility knife and cut it off. Then I strip about 3/4 of an inch off the end of each of the leads inside. Most replacement grounding plugs will look like this. The cord feeds through the plug from the back. Then I connect the wires. The green lead goes to the green screw. As always, the green color indicates the grounding circuit. The white lead goes on the silver terminal. Notice that the screws on this plug are located in the back. This is called a dead front plug. Replacement plugs, where the screws connect on the face of the plug and are covered with a removable cardboard disc, are illegal, even though they're still found in some stores. Finally, the black lead goes around the brass screw. The last step is to put the cover over the plug and screw down the cable clamps.
There are a few different mechanisms that make faucets work, and you can usually tell from the outside what sort of a mechanism you'll find on the inside. Faucets with separate controls for the hot and cold water like this one are either compression faucets or cartridge faucets. Compression faucets, like this one, seal out the water with a rubber washer. These tend to be older and a little less expensive. The handles have a certain stiffness to them, kind of like turning off an outside hose faucet. Cartridge faucets are newer and operate very easily. The handles are often fat and decorative and usually don't turn very far. Cartridges are also used in faucets that have one control for both the hot and cold water. This uses a disc-type cartridge. This is also a cartridge faucet, even though it's operated with a lever. This is a sleeve-type cartridge. A ball-type faucet also has a lever. You can distinguish it from a sleeve-type cartridge faucet by the fact that the lever doesn't rotate very far from side to side. You should figure out what type of a faucet you have and then fast forward to that section of the tape. And before you do any faucet repair, make a note as to whether the leaks are coming from the handles, from the base, or the spout of the faucet. Drips out of the spout are internal problems with the cartridge, ball, or washers, but leaks around the base of the handle or spout are caused by how the mechanism is mounted. This usually involves something called an O-ring, so you should watch for that when you take the faucet apart. Now, once the hot and cold water have been turned off, I can move on to my next step in repairing this compression faucet, which is to remove the handles. Usually there's a screw that holds the handle down. Have the drain shut while you do this so that if you drop any parts, you don't lose them for good. Then remove the handle. It slides up off a grooved shaft. The next piece to remove is the faucet stem. Often the stem is frozen into the valve. If you've got a metal piece that won't come loose, try squirting a little penetrating oil around it. Let it sit for about 15 minutes, and then try again to remove it. Now that it's free, I can grip the stem with an adjustable wrench and loosen it. The brand of penetrating oil we used will damage rubber parts. Well, that's okay here because we're going to replace everything, but you might want to explore other types of oil too. These valves work by forming a seal between the rubber washer at the end of the stem and a brass seat like this one. The washer covers the hole in the seat, stopping the flow of water. And these O-rings around the side of the stem keep the water from leaking out under the handle. Replacing the washer usually stops a faucet from leaking. I carefully remove the brass stem screw, and if this is damaged, I'll want to replace it too. Now I take out the old washer. This one looks like it was the culprit. I need to replace it with an identical washer. Washers all have numbers on them to help identify the size. It's possible to buy these individually, but it's a lot easier if you get an inexpensive assortment and find the one you need. It goes back on the bottom of the stem, and the screw goes back to hold it in place. Even if the O-ring isn't worn out yet, it's not a bad idea to replace it once the water's off and the valve is apart. I take the old one off by cutting it with a utility knife. Then I roll the new O-ring down the stem and snap it into place. Now I apply some heat-proof grease to the ring and to any other moving parts of the stem. Now there's one other potential trouble spot for leaks, and that's around the base of the spout here. This is a simple matter to fix. This collar holds the spout down. If I remove it, then the spout should just lift out. You can see that on the bottom of the spout there's another O-ring. Replacing this will probably stop any leaks around the spout.
New faucets tend to have cartridge valves. These are often called washerless faucets, and the cartridges are fairly easy to replace. Usually, this means prying off a decorative insert in the top of the handle to get to the screw that holds down the handle. This gets unscrewed and the handle lifts off. Underneath, a retaining nut holds the cartridge in place. I unscrew this, starting it with an adjustable wrench, then removing it by hand. Water comes into this valve through a hole in the bottom of the valve and leaves through a hole in the side. A rubber gasket on the bottom of the cartridge either covers or uncovers this hole. It's very rare that the cartridge itself will be the cause for the leak. If it is, you can get an exact replacement from the manufacturer. More than likely, the gasket will have deteriorated. And it's a simple matter to pry out the old gasket and the spring behind it and put in a new one. On this faucet, there are also two O-rings, one around the stem and one on the collar. If water is leaking around the handles, you should replace these too. Then the parts go back together the same way they came apart.
This single-handled faucet operates with a disc-type cartridge. Now, when this faucet leaks, you have to replace the entire cartridge. This cartridge is rather large, and on the bottom are two gaskets. Sometimes just replacing the gaskets can solve your problem. If not, you'll need to put in a whole new cartridge. You'll see that the gaskets snap on real easily right on the bottom. And as you can see, the manufacturer makes replacing this cartridge almost idiot-proof.
Faucets with this type of handle, one that moves straight up and pivots from side to side, usually have a sleeve-type cartridge. The replacement cartridge comes with new O-rings already on it. I lubricate them with a little silicone grease before I reinsert it. Don't insert the cartridge if the side seals are in. Grease them and install them after you've put in the cartridge.
A ball makes this faucet work. You can tell ball-type faucets by the way the handle pivots. The handle makes sort of an arc. Unlike a cartridge faucet, it doesn't rotate very much from side to side. The repair kit has an Allen wrench to remove the handle. Your first step with a leaky ball faucet should be to tighten down the adjusting ring. There's a special tool in the repair kit for this. If this doesn't work, you'll need to take the faucet apart. The cap comes off first. To avoid marring it with the channel lock pliers, I wrap masking tape around it. A wet rag can also do the job here. With the cap off, the cam washer, and the ball itself can be removed. At the bottom are 2 rubber seats with springs under them. If the leak is coming from the spout, start replacing parts from the seals up. If the leak is coming from the base of the spout, just lift the spout up to expose the O-rings. It just lifts up off the faucet. The O-rings can be replaced just as we did on the compression faucet. Otherwise, reassemble the faucet with new parts.
Most people at one time or another will have a toilet that won't stop running. Usually it produces kind of a hissing sound, and most of the time it just requires a simple adjustment. Now, many times what will happen is the water wants to raise up in the tank and it keeps going down the drain tube. The water just keeps on running constantly. An adjustment you can make is to tighten the screw here on what's called the ball cock. That will lower the float ball in the tank so the water will only raise up so far. As soon as this comes up to a certain level, it shuts off the incoming water. Many times people will just reach in and bend this rod down, lowering the float ball in the tank, accomplishes the same thing. But obviously that isn't our problem. So I'm thinking there are a couple things that could be wrong. First thing I want to do is try to replace the flapper. First I want to drain the tank here. I shut off the water down here and then just flush it. Sometimes what happens is this flapper doesn't seat properly. If you have to jiggle the handle a few times to get the water to stop running, this is probably your problem. Now what you can do is move in there and kind of realign that a little bit so it does seat properly. If it's too deteriorated, you'll have to pop it off its pivots, disconnect the chain, and then replace it. Get it off here. There we go. Now what you're able to do every now and again is just replace this seal right here, but obviously we can't on this model, so I just went ahead and bought another flapper. This one cost about $4. So we hook up the new one to the same pins, connect our little chain, and turn on the water and see what happens. Well, obviously that's not our problem, so time to move on to plan B, which is to replace the entire ball cock. Now, that's no small job, so again we'll have to drain the tank here. But we're going to want it really dry, so once the water's down, I'll wipe everything else out with a sponge. Okay, to remove this ball cock here, we first disconnect the water supply, and there's this nut on the bottom of the ball cock. I'll take off here, and pull the old one out. Well, the new one doesn't have a float ball off on the side. Instead, it has this float that rides up and down on the shaft of the unit. It also has this tube here that will screw in and out so you can adjust the water level that you want in the tank. I'll get this set to about where we want it and stick it inside the tank, and we can get everything all hooked up here. Okay, that's up there. Okay. Let's see if this thing works now. Oh, forgot the feeder tube. There's this little hose in here that goes down the drain tube and allows water to run into the bowl while the tank's filling. Okay, silence. Nice. I probably should adjust the water level in here before I wrap everything up. So again, I'll turn off the water, drain the tank before I do that. At Home Time, we're always moving from job site to job site, hauling around a lot of tools and materials. So we need a truck that can handle the workload, like the Chevy S-Series extended cab pickup.
This truck is ideal whether we're hauling materials from this construction site or driving down the highway. Its new step-designed rear bumper and lower step-up height make loading and unloading easier than ever.
This two-tier loading feature lets us expand our cargo space. We can store tools on the bottom and materials on the top. And with these convenient cargo tie-downs, we can make sure everything stays secure.
No matter what kind of load we carry, this double-walled construction protects the truck inside and outside and keeps it looking new.
This extended cab gives us even more space for extra tools or for bringing along a couple of helpers on the tough jobs.
This Chevy full-size pickup 4x4 is another one of our favorites for do-it-yourself jobs. This truck comes standard with a 4.3-liter V6 engine to give us enough torque and towing capacity to clear a couple of trees from this new home site. Okay, back up a couple of more feet.
Also standard are its rear-wheel anti-lock brakes that give you controlled, smooth stopping. That's the kind of security you should demand from any braking system. Chevy's got it.
Even with all the work we put this truck through, it still looks like new. The double-walled cargo box keeps any wear on the inside from showing through on the outside.
And all of Chevy's fleet-side pickup trucks give us the option of two-tier loading. So we have the option of using the box as is or creating a second loading level. Okay, that's good. Whether we're carrying passengers, hauling cargo, or pulling a trailer, this all-wheel drive Chevy Astro passenger van is the perfect vehicle.
With its combination of all-wheel drive and four-wheel anti-lock brakes, this van gives us the control we need, even in the worst weather.
In fact, the Chevy Astro van has the largest towing capacity of any van in its class, and its versatility makes sense for every do-it-yourselfer.
The spacious cargo area is ideal for hauling these shrubs or any other material. And with these available Dutch doors, loading is even more convenient. No matter what size of your project, you'll get the job done with a Chevy truck.
They've been a big part of every home time project, and it's easy for us to see why the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks are Chevy trucks. Well, it always seems like bathroom sinks tend to get clogged a lot more than other sinks. I suppose that's due in part to the fact people are always combing their hair over the top of them. What we're going to do here is start with some of the easy fixes and then work up to some of the more elaborate. So I suppose one of the simplest things to do is take a look at the stopper, see if that's clogged up at all. Okay, well, that really looks pretty good. All right, time to move onto the trap underneath the sink. Get some of this junk out of here. Now this is a trap right here. It's the bend in the drain line. Water collects right here, and so does debris from time to time, which can slow down the water flowing through there. Get my bucket in here. Now to take these off, sometimes you may need pliers. Lots of times you can do it by hand. These are coming off pretty well. So we'll get the trap off, dump the water out, and then take a look to see what we've got. Now actually that's in pretty good shape. That doesn't seem to be the problem. Okay, well, time to move on to phase 3. We'll start working with our auger here. I call it a snake. First I have to unscrew this compression fitting so I can run the snake straight into the drain. There we go. So, in goes the snake. Goes around the first bend, no problem. Now when you hit an obstruction, just tighten down our handle here. There we go. And just run that clockwise until you get around it. Okay, loosen that back up again. Keep snaking it down until you hit any other obstructions. Oh, there we go, we hit something. Okay, get turn that clockwise until you get it past. Okay, that did it. All right, let's check to see how we're doing. One thing about using the snake, you never quite know if you get the obstruction. You just have to take it in and out and just check to see if it's doing the job. Well, we got a little something there, a little bit of hair on that. Well, what I can do now is hook everything back up again. We'll run some water through it, and we'll see if that doesn't take care of the problem. Another tool to use for a clogged drain is a plunger. To make a plunger work properly, set it in place and run water over the sink to cover it up. While sealing the overflow drain with a rag, plunge up and down. If you're using a plunger on a kitchen sink with 2 drains, or with a drain and a disposal, you should cover up one of the openings and plunge the other. Otherwise, a second drain will release the pressure just like an overflow drain would. To
To clear a clogged toilet, we'll use many of the same procedures we use on a clogged sink or tub, but the tools are a little bit different. For instance, this is when we'd use the inside flange on the plunger. This will give a better seal to the shape of the bowl. If the bowl is backed up to the rim, you'll want to bail out some of the water. Then plunge up and down for about 2 minutes or so. If the plunging has dislodged the clog, any water in the bowl should drain down to the normal level. You want to test this by pouring in a bucket of water. If you flush the toilet now, you run the risk of flooding the bathroom if the clog isn't cleared. If it seems to be draining properly, then flush it. Flush it a few times to make sure that any debris gets washed down the waste pipes and out. As with a clogged sink, the last step before bringing in a plumber is to bring in the heavy artillery. This is a special type of auger called a closet auger. It's specifically designed to get to the trap in the toilet. Toilets also have a trap built right into the bowl. The waste has to travel up the trap, then down and out. The closet auger already has a bend in it to match the first curve of the trap. I pull the coil back so that the tip is right at the end of the rubber curve. Then I place the curve in the bottom of the toilet, hooking up into the trap. Now I turn the crank on the end of the shaft to start the auger spinning. If I feel the tip bite into the clog, I can either try to pull the clog back into the bowl and dispose of it, or work the snake back and forth to try to break up the clog. And again, once you've cleared the toilet, first check it with a bucket, not by flushing. The most common problems with doors and door locks can often be solved with a little lubrication. To oil squeaking or sticky hinges, partially drive up the hinge pins. Then, while protecting the trim, apply a spray oil lubricant. Let it soak in for a moment, then drive the hinge pins back down. Oiling the lock with the same type of lubricant will often stop problems there.
If this first application doesn't fix the problem in your lock, you'll need to take the lock apart and clean and lubricate the interior parts.
A loose hinge can make a door tough to open and close. Now, if you try to tighten the hinge screws and they just spin and spin and spin, then the problem is that the holes are stripped and need to be rebuilt. We'll start by filling the holes full of wood and glue. Now, you can use any small diameter wood for this. Dowels, toothpicks, wooden kitchen matches, even golf tees. Just fill in the hole with glue and then wedge in the new piece of wood. After the glue sets up a bit, you can cut off the excess with a utility knife. Now, if the wood doesn't cut easily, just give it a tap with a hammer after you've scored it. Then drill your new holes. Now, one thing you can do to make this fix last a while is use longer screws than you had in there before. Shimming a hinge can solve a couple of problems. One is if the latch bolt doesn't line up to the strike plate, and the other is if the door is out of square with the outside frame. Typically a door will sag so that the largest gap is above the latch side, and the opening on the latch side is larger on the bottom than at the top. By placing a shim behind the hinge, we move the door away from the frame, lifting the door and squaring it into the overall opening. Our first step was to remove the door. Then I removed the bottom hinge plate on the door jamb. By inserting something between the plate and the jamb, we'll move the plate away from the jamb and lift the far side of the door up. Thin pieces of cardboard work fine for this. I've cut them to fit into the mortise and the jamb. I just hold it in place and screw the hinge plate back down. there's no getting around it. This is a trial and error process. If this doesn't solve the problem, you can try adding a couple more shims. And if that doesn't do it, you might have to plane the door down. All right, let me try it.
Yeah, it starts right there.
Yeah.
As a last resort to solving the problem of the sticky door, you should take it out and plane it down in the area where it hits up against the door frame. You should do this only after you've shimmed the door for a square fit and tightened down any loose hinges.
Doors will tend to swell in damp weather, so this is a real good time to find the sticking points. Okay, go ahead. A plane works well to take off the high spots, but be careful at the corners not to split the ends of the wood. Electric sanders and electric planers will make the job even quicker and easier, or just plain sandpaper will do too.
It's a trial and error process, and you may discover that new sticking points emerge once you've eliminated the first ones.
Good.
Once you've got the door swinging freely, seal up any of the areas where there's exposed wood grain.
Fixing a sticking patio door can be as simple as cleaning its tracks. Start by vacuuming the tracks. Then get down there with a scrub brush and a degreasing cleanser and scrub down the track. A brass brush works well for this. If the door is still sticky, it could be that the door is actually dragging along the track, in which case you need to raise it. Look for the little adjusting screws next to the rollers and raise the door just enough to get it off the tracks. To keep the door running smoothly, grease the tracks upper and lower as well as the rollers with white lithium compound. You can get this at auto parts stores, and it's a good choice because it isn't affected by low temperatures.
Well, here's a site that's all too familiar. Probably one of the most common home repairs is fixing a broken window. Now, the first thing we want to do here is remove all the old glazing compound. Now, some of it may be real easy to remove like this, but then you run into some really old hard compound. A heat gun will make removing this a little bit easier. Just be careful not to scorch the wood. Also, make sure you don't point the gun directly at the glass. It could shatter too and make an even bigger mess. Now, be patient with this stuff. It can take a while. Well, once you've removed all the old glazing compound, then you have to pull out the glazing points that are holding the glass in place. Now, with a little bit of luck, you'll just be able to get your blade up against them and kind of jimmy them out like that. But every now and again, you'll hit a tough one. There you have to just bend it up very carefully so you don't crack the glass. And using your pliers, pull it out. Gotcha. Well, once we get all the glazing points out, then we can remove the glass. Now, here you have to be very careful. Obviously, this stuff can be very sharp. So get this out, sit down over here. And these sponge sanding pads work great then for cleaning out this groove. Before you set in your new pane of glass, apply a narrow bead of glazing compound. This will help cushion the glass and also it seals it. Now I can just set in the pane of glass. I ordered the pane of glass a 1/4 inch short in both directions. This way there's an 1/8 inch expansion all the way around. You need that because glass and wood will both expand with the heat. Just center the pane and then press lightly to set it into the compound. I'll anchor the glass with some new points. Now, that's going to be kind of tricky. You've got to put enough pressure on them to get them started into the wood, but not so much you crack the new glass. Believe me, that's easy to do. You want to put a point in about every 10 inches or so. Well, glazing compound forms a seal between the glass and frame to keep drafts from leaking through, but more importantly, it channels water off the glass and down the sash to keep the sash from rotting. Well, the glazing compound will do its job best if you pack it in before smoothing it out. That'll get rid of any air pockets, make a good seal between the compound and the edge of the sash. Then you smoothly draw your blade across to trim off the excess. You should give it a couple days to set up before you paint it. I finished up the window, so now I'm going to start working on these old wood screens.
There are combination windows on the house. Those were installed some time ago, but the porch still has the old wood screens. Now, the repair techniques are different for each type of screen, but we're going to show you both.
I finished up that door. How you doing over here?
Oh, not too bad. I'm going to start working on these wood screens. You want to start in the aluminum?
Sure.
Okay. When you remove the molding on old frames, start with the middle piece and then take off the edge pieces. With each piece, you start by loosening the midsection and then make your way out to the ends. You want to work carefully so you don't break the molding. If you do, just ask your lumberyard for screen molding.
With the newer aluminum frame screens, the screening is held in place with a vinyl spline. You can reuse this as long as it's still in good shape and it's not cracked or brittle. It comes in a few sizes, so take a bit of the old stuff to the store with you if you need to replace it.
Screening comes in many different forms. There's vinyl, fiberglass, aluminum, brass, and even copper screening. Now, the windows here on the porch had metal screening. There's some good reasons to go with metal screening. For one thing, metal screening's a little bit finer, so it's less visible. It gives the porch a little bit more of an outdoorsy feel. The other thing is most fiberglass screening tends to be black, which wouldn't match the rest of the screening on the house very well.
We're using fiberglass with the aluminum frames. It's easy to work with, and it doesn't stain like the metal screening fabric.
Now, to stretch the wire, just take a 2x4 and wrap it around the screening. Try and get yourself up fairly close to the window with it, and pull that over the edge of the window to get it nice and taut. It stretches it just fine. Then you want to start with the top and bottom first, and then do the sides, and leave any cross pieces for last.
When using newer style screens, just rolling the spline into the groove gives the right amount of tension to stretch the screen. You start the spline a couple of inches from the corner and then just work the spline with a spline roller into the groove. Now, as you work this, make sure that the screen stays straight.
With the screen in place, I can reattach the molding using wire brads. Now, you can do this through the old holes if they aren't rotted out. If they are, then just find a new area. If you're worried about splitting the molding, just pre-drill for the brads. Now, one thing I am going to do is countersink the brads so that the heads don't stick out.
There. Now all you need to do is trim off the excess, and this screen's as good as new.
Squeaks are a common problem with just about any type of floor, and the cause is usually here, in the supporting structure. Sometimes the problem is a gap between the subfloor and the joists. One way to fix this is to fill the gap with a shim. Now, you can make these or buy them. Just tap it gently into the gap. Don't force it too far, or you may enlarge the gap. Another problem is that a gap could have formed between the subfloor and the layer of flooring above, the underlayment. You can pull these together just by screwing up into the area of the squeak. Unless you know the precise thickness of both layers, it's safest to use 1-inch screws. The screws pull the two layers tightly together. We're not exactly sure what happened here, but we're going to have to do something about it. This ceramic tile will have to be removed and replaced. Whenever you're doing a ceramic tile job, it's best to buy a few extra tiles. Because tiles are an organic product, the colors will vary from batch to batch, and a replacement tile bought a few years after the original job was done possibly won't match the older tiles. The first step in repairing the floor is to dig out the grout around the broken tile. There's a special tool called a grout saw for doing this, but as you can see, a utility knife will also do the trick. Next, I shatter the broken tile into small pieces by hitting it with a nail set and a hammer. Bits of tile may go flying, so be sure to wear safety glasses. I want to break the tile into small pieces. Then I can lift these out individually. Then I scrape out all the adhesive or mortar that originally held the tile using a coal chisel. Now that the tile is gone, I can also remove any bits of grout that are still sticking to the surrounding tiles. The remaining surface should be as clean as possible, so I vacuum out all the debris.
You should set the replacement tile with the same sort of adhesive or mortar as the original tiles, the same brand if you can. Spread it out onto the back of the tile and press it down firmly into place. If any mortar oozes up through the joints, clean it out before it sets. Let it set for 48 hours. Then apply grout with a grout float, using the edge to scrape the grout off of the surface of the tiles. Gentle sponging will shape the joints and remove excess grout. In a day or so, you probably won't be able to see the repair. Now we're going to show you a method for repairing a damaged section of vinyl flooring. First, cut a slightly larger piece of matching vinyl. Align the pattern to that of the damaged section. Secure with masking tape. Then, using a sharp utility knife, cut through both layers of material. Make sure that the blade of the knife is held perpendicular to the floor. Any leaning this side or that can widen the seam. With a patch cut, we lift it out, remove the damaged section, and clean the floor of any old adhesive or debris. This may require a hand scraper, first wedging the tool in the center and then gradually prying back the old floor. Remember, old resilient flooring can contain asbestos fibers, so avoid creating any dust. Don't sand the old flooring or the backing. Now, with the floor clean of all grit, we can apply the adhesive to the cutout area, position the new section, and secure with hand roller.
I guess holes in drywall come in 3 size categories. Sometimes you get them small enough where you can just put some spackle over it. Next up, we have a hole this size. And we can't just spackle it because the spackle will fall right through. So we're going to put some backing behind it before we patch it. If the hole were any bigger than this, we'd have to cut out a section of drywall right up to the middle of the stud on each side, put in a new section of drywall, and go through the mudding and taping process all over again. Anyway, this is what we're using for backer. These are short pieces of 1x, and to start off with, I'm putting a little construction adhesive on each end. Now I stick it in so that the adhesive is going to hold it to the back of the good drywall around the hole. Now the adhesive will hold eventually, but if you're impatient, you can secure it with a couple of drywall screws right away. These first 2 pieces I could hold from behind with my hand, but this last piece, well, I had to put a screw in the middle so I have something to hold on to until I get this fastened, and then I can pull the screw out. Okay. There's all sorts of material out on the market for repairing walls. You want to look for a couple of qualities. Something that dries fast, something that sands pretty easy, and something that isn't going to crack. Now this is a lightweight spackling compound. It's really light. Matter of fact, when you pick up the container, you think to yourself, how can this be strong enough? But the chemicals and stuff in it make it strong, and it's fairly easy to work with. I'm just forcing it into the hole, filling everything up. I'm going to try to get it pretty smooth on the surface. If anything, I'm going to try to put on a little more than I need so I'll be able to sand it down flat. These kind of spackles dry pretty quick, except I've got it on so thick, it'll probably take a couple of hours to dry before I can sand it. Okay, well that first layer is pretty solid, but for a hole this deep, you might want to let it harden overnight. Now what I'm doing is hopefully putting on my final coat, but I'm using a vinyl-based spackle instead of the lightweight stuff. It's a little more, well, creamier and smoother, so it should smooth out over the edges of the patch a little easier. This coat goes out over the drywall, pretty thick. Then I work it a little. This is tougher than it looks. I need to leave enough to cover the edge of the hole, but still get everything real smooth. So once I've got this worked the way I want it, then I need to let it dry for about an hour or two, then come back and sand and paint it.
Another approach to use is called the hat patch method. The idea here is to insert a small piece of drywall the size of the hole with some paper backing to serve as the joint tape. The first step in this process is to clean the rough edges of the existing hole. Then I cut out the patch using a sharp utility knife, and on the back side came in an inch, scored the circumference, and scraped off the gypsum, being careful not to tear off the facing paper. Well, there's a couple of reasons why you may have to replace a ceramic tile. We have one here with some holes in from a grab bar. But fortunately, we have some old tiles that we can use. It's just about impossible to match up tiles after the fact. I mean, even if you're able to work with the same manufacturer and the same exact product, chances are the color's going to be different from the lot that you buy today versus a lot, let's say, that was installed 10 or maybe even 20 years ago. So always keep tile whenever you're doing, or keep the extra tile whenever you're doing a tile job. Well, at any rate, first thing you want to do in removing a tile is to scrape out the grout around the edges. Now sometimes you can use a utility knife, but you can also get this little tool. It's called a grout saw. Now, probably one of the trickier parts of this job is getting the old tile out of here. Now our tile contractor has this little power grinder with a dry diamond blade on it. He just makes a couple of cuts here and then starts prying the old tile out. We're going to be using the low-tech alternative here. This is a center punch. Okay, now that I've got a starting spot, I start prying out the pieces. Now you always want to pry against an old tile here. You don't want to come out here and pry against one of the tiles that will stay for fear of chipping up some of the tiles that will remain in place. I'm just scraping off some of the excess pieces here. I did end up removing a little bit of the drywall, which is always a risk you take when pulling out a tile like this. If this were a plaster mortar backing, it wouldn't be as much of a problem. I just want to clean this all up. Now, it isn't a bad idea to test fit the tile that will be going in, just to make sure everything is looking nice and level. And that looks pretty good. Okay, now we can apply the adhesive. The adhesive for this will be a silicone caulk. Well, the tricky thing here is putting on the right amount of silicone so the tile sets at the right height. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, so now I just have to wait about a half hour for the silicone to set up. Oh, that caulk really seems to hold it in place. Well, the last thing we have to do is grout. Now, there's white grout in between all the other tiles. So we picked up some pre-mixed white grout at the local home center. We don't have to worry about mixing powder and water together this way. It's just a matter of getting some on the end of your finger and then pressing it in there, making sure you really get it down inside of all the cracks. It's the important thing. We just use a damp sponge here to wipe off all the excess. But once this dries, it'll probably be a lot whiter and cleaner than the rest of the grout. So now's probably a real good time to get a good grout cleaner, clean the entire area, and then apply a grout sealer over the top of all of that.
Wallpaper has its own tricks for repairing. In particular, there are a couple of problems that deserve attention. One common problem with wallpaper is that the seams work loose. This is easy to fix. This glue comes in a tube with a tapered nozzle at the end. I lift up the edge of the wall covering and squirt a little adhesive under it. Wipe away any excess glue with a damp sponge. And use a seam roller to smooth the seam down. You can also patch wall coverings if you've saved a remnant of the original wallpaper. If not, you can just cut a section out from a place where it won't be missed, such as a closet or behind a door. I take the scrap and place it on the wall over the damaged area so that the patterns line up precisely at the edges. Then I tape it in place. Cut through both layers of covering at the same time with a utility knife. If you can cut along a line in the pattern, the seam will be hidden better. After peeling off the new material, I wet the old area and remove it. This may require a little elbow grease, but since the area is so damaged anyway, don't worry about taking it all out intact. Once the area is clean and dry, I just apply some adhesive on the back of the patch and place it into position. Obviously, I position it so that the patterns match up perfectly. The adhesive dries slowly, so I've got some time to slide the patch around into just the right place. Then I smooth it down with a clean, wet sponge.
Well, thanks for watching the tape, and good luck with your home repair projects.